Howdy everybody, how y'all doing? Welcome to the Ice House. We try to keep things cool, calm, collected, and mostly a bit chill, right? Well, as you can tell from the title, we're gonna borrow some, an alliteration to one of the most classic and well-known moments in puppet history. That's right. I think a lot of us remember when Cookie Monster would go on screen and gobble all those cookies up, yum 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 yum, right? And I think we learned a lot, right? We learned that C is for cookie, and it's good enough for me, right? Well, today we're gonna go a little bit further with that, right? Because just in the way that Cookie Monster has learned that cookies are delicious and cookies are great, but there comes a point where you gotta eat other foods, right? Like, I think Nick Offerman once said that you need to eat the food, eat the food that your food eats, right? So, like, salad, vegetables, things that make the cow nice and tasty for that ribeye. You get what I'm saying, right? And so, one of the things we've seen is that Cookie Monster was never told that he couldn't eat cookies. He was never said, we're changing your name to not Cookie Monster, right? He's still gobbling cookies, but he's learned moderation, right? Because there's something about excess and too much of a good thing, or too much of a thing in general, right? And we puppets can't get the, as the kids say, the diabetes, but a lot of you guys out there can, and being healthy is important, right? And sure, there was that whole thing about yo gabba gabba and yummy in my tummy, which was, kind of weird, but kind of fun. But anyway, I digress. The point is, today, instead of talking about cookies, as it says, C is for what, and it's good enough for who or whom. I'm not great with grammar, so I'm, just gonna leave it the way it is, because somebody will correct me. So I figured if I do the either or, choose your own adventure, maybe that would mitigate some comments. I don't know, we'll find out. But, okay, now we've set the stage, right, if you will. Today, instead of cookies, I want to talk about the word that has come up quite a bit lately, in with the past few weeks, and not just the past few weeks, but the word censorship, right? Because it starts with a C, but who is it good for? And there's a bit of a history with the idea of censorship, right? And I definitely agree that there's something about protecting children and the little waddlers, right? And making sure they're not subject to things that is more adult content, or things that an adult would be able to sift through and decide if it was good enough for them, right? Or maybe something that they don't want to be a part of and partake in, right? There's definitely something to that, and that's definitely a real conversation that a lot of people are having and disagreeing with how that should be implemented. And like I said, we're just gonna table that for the side. But today, I kind of want to talk about the things that have been kind of affecting us as YouTubers, as parasocial media personalities, and all of us here who have been learning how to survive online, right, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, right? Because when we were all stuck at home and we didn't really have anything else but the internet to talk to each other, and then we were told we weren't allowed to say half the things that were on our minds, it was kind of rough, right? And I know one of the big headlines this week is that Google is talking about reinstating all the accounts that were banned for political conversations, right? And I think that's a positive, right? Because here at the Ice House, I've said it for a long time, that I'm an advocate for free speech, right? I'm an advocate that you should be able to, in these United States and wherever else that it's free and legal, is to be able to speak your mind. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no consequences for speaking your mind, right? Like we talked about, like we've seen in the last few weeks, that there are people who said things on social media, that came back to bite them in the, well, you know what I mean, because maybe they were not the most, not the best things to say out to the ether and, out to the public, and then when other people say stuff, people like and follow suit and think that they're talking to a bunch of people that agree with them, and maybe they are, but when it's posted on the internet, it's not just the people who agree with you that can see it, right? And so, unfortunately, people said some things, and some people lost their jobs, and do I think that's necessarily the best practice? Not necessarily, but it's kind of the groundwork that's been set up for, years now, so the whole thing about what goes around comes around in this kind of sort of way. I mean, I'm not saying that's good, but it is, right? Because, we'll get to that in a second. But, it's kind of like, one of the other big headlines of the last couple of weeks is, the guy Jimmy Kimmel, right? He has some interesting takes, and maybe he said things that, his apology was an interesting one. I don't know if you want to go back and watch it, you can. I talked about it with my friend Gator on our Wednesday night stream over on his channel. But it seems like now the network understood that this was a time that maybe we don't need to say things like that. Maybe we need to try to calm down the heat, right? And whether Jimmy had a change of heart, or he realized that he wants to keep his job for as long as it is he can, at least until the contract renews and all that stuff, right? We'll see how that goes. But I did find it interesting, and I know a lot of you guys did, that he seems like Sinclair and some of the other affiliates were still upset, and they didn't want to air his program anymore. Because, again, he has the freedom of speech to say things, but when it comes to a business, employer, or people that, pay for advertising on the show and such, if they don't want to, give you revenue because they don't agree with what you're doing, it kind of happens that way. It's like when, that whole thing about the platform of Twitch that was for gamers, and then it was for people who pretended to be gamers, and then it was for people who, did hot tubbing, which really isn't gaming at all. And then a few years back, when the advertiser said, we're not paying for that advertisement, we don't want our ads there, we don't want to give revenue for that, that's not what we're supporting, right? And so, because the powers that be with money, decided that you don't get paid for doing something that we don't want to support. And, as I've said many times here when we're on, the streamers or parasocial networks, if you're monetized, you're a contractor working for a company, right? It's in the same way that, a lot of people were banned, for the last few years for saying things that, YouTube didn't say that you couldn't say them, they just said you couldn't say this on this platform, or, on Facebook and all the other places where people were banned. And like I said, I don't agree with that, because one of the things I think is most important is that we have conversations, right? That if something becomes, censored or taboo, or something that it's just bad, right? We can't discuss it, because then you have people doing things that not only are considered, illegal by the laws of the land, but sometimes they put themselves in jeopardy, in harm's way, because, they were going to participate in what they wanted to participate in, and by telling them they couldn't do that, just meant they had to circumvent certain avenues and find different ways to do things. It's kind of like when people were a little bit, upset or confused or baffled why, some of the responses to the Charlie Kirk thing, right? When people are sort of disconnected in a way, or when they've kind of been living through a system, right, or living on their phones and reacting in a certain way, like, whether they say it out loud or not, it doesn't change what they're thinking or feeling. And when people self-censor to fit in, right, or fit in, doesn't mean that they've actually changed as people, right? So what I'm getting at is, again, I advocate the free speech, and when it comes to the idea of not liking something or somebody for what they do, right, and wanting them to stop, I guess creating laws is one way to do it. But really, if you tell somebody what they do is illegal, or you decide to censor a certain portion of things, their people, or their certain behavior patterns, it only causes a little bit more of tension, right? Like I said, there's things that should definitely be illegal, right? There's things that are just wrong and bad. Like I said earlier, protect the kids. And I mean that on lots of levels that I'm not going to get into. But when it comes to preferences of adults that I don't agree with or wouldn't participate in, and, you know, it's not extending to harming other people and being consensual and all that stuff, I don't know. It kind of, me telling them that it should be illegal, or anybody telling them that it should be illegal, is, I don't think it's the right necessarily course of avenue. Because and here's what I'm getting at. If you want to change a society, if you want to actually, if you think there's things wrong, right? If you think that there's certain behavior trends or issues that you think should change, right? Just telling somebody not to do it and that they're wrong for doing it and that they're going to get in trouble now that they're doing something that, you know, they did before and it was okay, is, it doesn't change their heart. It doesn't change their mind. It doesn't make them actually care or want to listen to anything you have to say, right? And it's kind of like what I said yesterday in my PSA, that a little bit of grace and kindness goes a long way, because the truth is we're all kind of messed up, right? And we're all not where we necessarily want to be or think we should be. But the whole thing of polarizing and setting sides and, you know, trying to pretend like somebody's better because they're not maybe seen or perceived doing certain things in a certain way, right? I'll just leave it at that. I just think, you know, we're not going to find any sort of understanding or agreement if we just try to ruin the other person's day because we don't agree or like what they're doing and we think it's wrong, right? It becomes a battlefield, which isn't going to help anything. And then the other thing I want to say is, when it comes to this whole censorship and trying to make laws to stop somebody from doing something that you don't like, well, when you give the powers that be the authority to change rules and overstep and supersede certain balances that used to be in place, right? There comes a point where, you know, you agree with them and you're all for it, until somebody else comes to power, and somebody else with those allowances that you gave that position then come after what you think is important and you think is valuable. And so now we have not only people disagreeing, but people vying for power and control to make everybody else's life miserable. And it's a pretty dark downward spiral after that. So what I advocate for is less of the censorship, less of the, you know, telling people they're wrong and they should stop because I don't agree with them. But I think we should be able to talk to people and help them understand, right? Even if we don't agree on everything, but come to some sort of, well, trying to work with each other and be kind to each other in our differences. Because we may not win them over, but maybe we can just actually survive and enjoy life with not people that people like to say are the other. And maybe the other isn't really that bad or different from us after all. And just like Cookie Monster learned that cookies are great, but in moderation, maybe there's things that, well, we don't understand or we don't like, but that doesn't mean they need to go completely away, right? Or maybe there's things that are, I don't know, choices people make that they don't have to be pushed to, let it consume their whole identity, instead of just being part of, a community and a culture and learning how to experience life together, right? Well, that's all I got for today, and hope there's some decent takeaway for you guys out there. I'd love to hear comments down below, grammar or thoughts or pondering whatsoever. And if you want to like or share or, tell somebody about it because you think this is a good conversation to be part of, well, that'd be cool too. So, anyway, I think I am gonna go have my daily cookie ration because all this talking made me kind of hungry. So, until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.